There is no power in the engines. What's happening? Watch it. We are going down. Nepal, a small country nestled in the lap of the Himalayas, where traveling is an adventure, but even more thrilling and perilous is the air travel there. Pokhara. In Nepal, First Officer Anju was piloting her final flight, after which she was supposed to be promoted to captain. Anju was just about to land her plane when she tried something she had never done before. In the cockpit with Anju was her instructor, who was not only keeping an eye on her performance but also guiding her. Everything was going perfectly when suddenly a warning alarm goes off in the cockpit. As soon as this happens, the plane loses its power. The engines stop responding, and the plane starts plummeting rapidly downward. The runway is only a minute away, but the altitude drops below 500 feet. In the midst of this, Anju tries to increase the plane's power, but nothing happens. She pushes the lever to full power, but still, there is no improvement. Seeing the situation slipping out of hand, the senior pilot immediately takes control of the plane. However, before they can do anything, the plane suddenly starts tilting to the left. Now, does the plane land safely, or do the 72 people on board lose their lives? This is the story of Yeti Airlines Flight 691. So let's start this video. January 15, 2023 is a beautiful day in Kathmandu, Nepal, and the sun is shining all around. Today is also a special day for First Officer Anju Kathawada because after today's flight, she is going to become Captain Anju Kathawada, which is her dream. However, Anju, with her educational background as a nurse, but during the year 2006, after losing her husband Captain Deepak Pokhara in a plane crash, she decided to start her career in aviation. Actually, for years after Deepak's death, Anju went to America to undergo pilot training. Then, after completing her training in 2010, she returned to Nepal and joined the same Yeti Airlines for which her husband used to fly planes. Among just 6 female pilots employed by this airline, Anju was one. She had 6,400 hours of flying experience. In today's flight, she is accompanied by Senior Captain Kamal KC, who has 22,000 hours of flying experience. Kamal KC has been with Yeti Airlines since 2009, and whenever a pilot is about to be promoted, he is sent on their final flight to assess the pilot's performance. It is for this reason that he is present on today's flight with Anju. Flight 691 of Yeti Airlines is scheduled to go from Kathmandu to Pokhara, which is the second most densely populated city in Nepal. Along with that, it is also the most beautiful city in Nepal, where the Annapurna mountain range of the Himalayas begins. The natural beauty of this city attracts tourists from all over the world, which is why it is also called the tourism capital of Nepal. This is why a new airport, Pokhara International Airport, was built in this city, and its opening took place just 2 weeks before this flight, on New Year's Day 2023. For your information, the distance between Kathmandu and Pokhara is 150 kilometers. This new airport has been built just 3 kilometers east of an existing domestic airport. The new airport has 2 runways, with the first one being Runway 12 and the second one being Runway 30. Planes coming from Kathmandu usually prefer to land on Runway 30 because it allows for a straight approach, requiring less maneuvering. On the other hand, landing on Runway 12 requires pilots to navigate the plane through the mountains, taking a sharp turn at a low altitude and completing a full circle to land on Runway 12. This is not a published visual approach, rather, Yeti Airlines has internally developed this route for its flights. The plane used for today's flight is called the ATR 72-500, which is a turboprop airliner designed specifically for short flights. The plane used for this flight was 16 years old, previously used by Kingfisher Airlines in India and Nak Air in Thailand before being purchased by Yeti Airlines in 2019. Even so, the plane was in excellent condition during this flight. It takes only 26 minutes for a flight from Kathmandu to Pokhara. On that day, First Officer Anju and Captain Kamal were scheduled to make 2 round trips on this route. Now, since this was a check ride for Anju, she was seated in the left seat in the cockpit, while Captain Kamal was in the right-hand side seat. On that day, during their first scheduled flight, ATC assigned them to land on runway 30, which they had no problem with. Just 30 minutes later, their plane was ready to return from Pokhara to Kathmandu after taking on new passengers and refueling. The plane started its approach to the runway, and within 26 minutes, it had returned to Kathmandu. After this, their schedule included the second flight, which we mentioned at the beginning of the video. Anju was just 30 minutes away from completing her 100 hours of flying time, after which she was to be promoted to captain. That means all she had to do to achieve that was safely land this flight from Kathmandu to Pokhara. Before taking off, flight attendant Ashan Magar creates a TikTok video and publishes it. Additionally, among the 69 passengers on this flight, there were also 4 Indian tourists who were live streaming the entire flight on Facebook. During this time, both pilots and the cockpit prepared the plane for this flight. Let's take a look at the center console of this plane once, as it will help you understand the incident. On the center console of this plane, to the left, there is a lever that controls the speed brake, emergency brake, and parking brakes. To its right, there are power levers, and on the right side, there is a flap switch. Right before that, between the flap switch and power lever, there are 2 condition levers. Now, what does the condition lever do? To understand this, let's walk outside the plane. As we mentioned, the ATR 72-500 is a turboprop airplane. This means that to fly, it receives thrust from its 2 fans. But how does this work? If you look closely at the plane's wing, you'll notice that it curves upward. Because of this curve, the air coming from the front, which passes over the wing, has to travel a longer distance. As a result, there is much less pressure created on the top side of the wing. However, due to the flat bottom of the wing, high pressure is created underneath. Now, it's because of this pressure difference in the wing that the plane starts to lift upward. The design of the wings helps us understand how the plane goes up, but pushing the plane forward is done by the blades in the plane's engines. This means that the propellers on the plane's engines are not just ordinary fan blades. Instead, each blade in the propellers acts like a small wing itself. This means that the same scientific concept that helps the plane lift up in the air using wings is used in turboprop airplanes to push the plane forward, or to give it thrust, using propellers. However, many times during a flight, you don't need additional momentum, especially when gliding for a long distance in the event of an engine failure. Therefore, a condition lever is installed in the plane, which is used to rotate the propeller blades in the direction of the airflow. Therefore, a condition lever is installed in the plane, which is used to rotate the propeller blades in the direction of the airflow. By doing this, the blades in the plane's engine move with the direction of the airflow, allowing the air to pass through them smoothly without colliding with the blades. However, in this situation, when the air does not collide with the blades, the engine cannot push the plane forward. This means that the engine does not generate any thrust. When the lever is pushed forward, the propellers generate maximum thrust. And when they are pulled back, the generation of thrust stops. Alright, back to the story. So, the plane is now ready for its second round trip from Kathmandu to Pokhara. After completing the pushback process without wasting any time, the plane starts running on the runway. At exactly 10:32 in the morning, it takes off from Tribhuvan Airport. After passing through the beautiful valleys of the Himalayas, the pilots contact Pokhara ATC when they are 15 miles away from their destination, Pokhara International Airport, and they receive clearance from the ATC to land on runway 30, adopting a straight-in approach, without any delay. However, since this was Anju's familiarization flight, Captain Kamal wanted her to also be familiar with the approach to land on runway 12. Therefore, they themselves request ATC to assign them the approach for runway 12, and ATC grants them the clearance for it. Just to remind you, this is the same approach that has not yet received approval from the Nepal Aviation Authority. Moving forward with this approach, the plane's altitude is reduced to 6,500 feet at 10:51 a.m. At this time, the plane is only 5 miles away from the airport. During this time, First Officer Anju pulls the power lever back, and the plane begins to descend downwards. As soon as the plane's speed crosses 180 knots, Anju says, "Flaps 15." Upon hearing this, Captain Kamal sets the flaps to 15, and then lowers the gear at 170 knots. In this way, after completing the crosswind phase of this approach, both pilots turn the plane to the left and advance it to its downwind phase. The weather was really clear, so the ATC could easily identify this plane just by looking at it. At 10:56, when the plane is at an altitude of 721 feet, so at that moment, the pilot turns off the autopilot. Just 5 seconds later, as the plane crosses the speed of 150 knots, a voice comes from Anju's throat, "Flaps 30. At this time, Captain Kamal is performing 3 different duties. He is monitoring the pilot and training guiding Anju at the same time. They are also understanding this new approach, through which before this flight, landing had only been done twice, meaning they had a lot of workload pressure on them. So when Anju says, "Flaps 30, Captain Kamal responds, "Flaps 30 and descending." He says this in reply, but he doesn't set the flaps lever to 30. Instead, he accidentally pulls the condition lever backward. As we told you, when the condition lever is pulled backward, it puts the propellers in the feathered position, meaning thrust generation stops from them. Captain Kamal doesn't even realize that he has pulled the wrong lever. Just 5 seconds later, the master caution alarm starts ringing in the plane, and the sound coming from the engine changes. The plane suddenly stops in the air. In a panic, First Officer Anju pushes the power lever. But despite this, the plane starts losing altitude rapidly. They are just a minute away from the runway and only 500 feet above the ground. Anju pushes the power lever once again, setting it to maximum, but it doesn't make any difference. During this time, Captain Kamal takes control of the plane's yoke in his hands, and then his attention goes to the flaps lever, which was set to 15 instead of 30. He immediately sets it to 30, but nothing happens. The plane's altitude continues to decrease steadily. Unfortunately, due to the chaos and excessive workload in the cockpit, they don't pay attention to the condition lever at all. Instead of resolving the problem, setting the flaps to 30 without thrust exacerbates the situation because it increases the plane's drag. Just 4 seconds later, the stick shaker activates, indicating that the plane is now stalling. Due to an imbalance in the upright force on both wings, the plane's left wing starts to drop while the right wing rises. As a result, the plane starts to bank sharply to the left and rapidly descends. The pilots were unable to do anything to stop it at this point, and at 10:57 a.m., the plane crashes near the banks of the Seti Gandhaki River. Captain Kamal, First Officer Anju, and Flight Attendant Ashan Magar and all the people on board, including 68 passengers, lose their lives in the crash. And this incident becomes an indelible stain on Nepal's aviation history, never to be forgotten. Techo Air Channel, and on behalf of our viewers, we pray for the peace of the souls of all those who lost their lives in this tragic incident. We appeal to God that such an incident never occurs again. If you are liking our hard work, please boost our morale by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. We are always grateful for your support.